Well, thanks everyone for joining us. This is Securing Your Hybrid Cloud with F5 and Red Hat. I'm Cody Richard.
Hey, I'm Rodney Newton with
Um,
Ingram Micro.
I'm the Global Ecosystem SA for Ingram Micro at Red Hat. I cover our relationship from a technical standpoint, and then I'll let you.
So I am the technology consultant at Ingram Micro, and I am tied solely to the F5 business. So any business that runs through Ingram Micro in North America, I'm the technical resource for that business.
And so we'll briefly just go over what we're going to talk about today, right? We're going to start with who Red Hat is. I saw through the show of hands that maybe not everyone knows who Red Hat is. We're also going to talk about who F5 is. We'll talk a little bit about some of our customers, joint customers, as well as just the Red Hat logos that everyone kind of gets used to seeing. And then we'll finish off with the relationship from a Red Hat and F5 standpoint, as well as with Ingram Micro, right? Ingram being one of our largest distributors is really important in all of the work that we do here at Red Hat and F5. So we'll start with who Red Hat is, right? So Red Hat is a open source IT enterprise software company. We were started in 1993. We're now a subsidiary of IBM. We're part of the hybrid cloud business unit at IBM. As you can see here, right, we have a bunch of numbers. 90% of the Fortune 500 uses Red Hat in some standpoint. It's 100% in the United States, and then globally, it's 90%. So we just have that small 10% of people that are holding off for some reason, but we'll eventually, obviously, get them with partners like F5. 19,000 employees. That number is always growing. 105 offices as well as 40 countries. Then when you add the IBM numbers in there, it grows exponentially. 350,000 employees and everywhere, probably including Antarctica, and then we launched RHEL into the International Space Station. So we're even in space at this point. Also, the first $3 billion open source company. And so what that means is through our product development methodology, we take open source technology, make it enterprise ready, and sell it to enterprises, right? So security, hardening, support, training, and enablement as well. And that has gotten us to this $3 billion mark. And now I want to talk just a little bit about our overall product development strategy. It was what makes Red Hat really unique. So at any given time, Red Hatters all across the world are participating in over 1 million open source projects. Some of these are projects that maybe individual Red Hatters are interested in. Some of those are key to our global product strategy. What we do with those products at that level is participation. So writing code, maybe evangelizing, advocating for those projects in our enterprise customers, or we have customers that are using them today and we really want to see those become products. We take those specific projects that we're really interested in that maybe have some sort of customer market for us. We integrate those into either our products, or we make them standalone products themselves. And from there, we use that to stabilize. So making them enterprise ready, hardened, security, as I mentioned, right? That enablement and training piece, and as well as support. Going on to our kind of portfolio, right? This is the extensive portfolio of Red Hat. I really love this slide because there's not too many companies out there that will show you exactly where their products come from. You can go out today, you can Google Overt, Fedora, CoreOS, and you can see the source code for those products. Those specific products are what we use to make the Red Hat products. So it's really a unique thing that Red Hat does, taking the open source community and making it into something that enterprises can really use. And I'll turn it over to you for a sec. I know I'm kind of calling you out, but obviously F5 is also very open source friendly. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the products that they do as well?
Yeah. So from an F5 standpoint, one of the conversations that Cody and I had earlier today actually is as close as being the most agnostic manufacturer I've ever seen. F5 is that, right? They play nicely with a lot of different technologies, right? Where they sit in the stack, and I'm going to go over this when we get to the who is F5 section, but where they sit in the stack is what they refer to as this very strategic point of control, this proxy layer. So they're able to do a lot of things around identity, around traffic management, around security. So they almost have to play nicely in the sandbox with a lot of different manufacturers, right? Red Hat being one of them. So I didn't see a lot of F5 hands in the room, right? So I'll probably go a little slower on the origins of F5 and where they sort of cut their teeth. That way there'll be some context and it'll make a little bit more sense of why it makes so much sense to fit into the discussion around Red Hat and OpenShift and Kubernetes. So thanks.
Great, thanks. All of Red Hat's portfolio fits into what we call the digital transformation pillars, right? We've been hearing a lot about that today. Ingram Micro went through their own digital transformation. It's a combination of culture changes as well as technology changes. On the technology side, we've identified these three pillars as kind of where our technology fits, as well as where most of our customers, when they go through this digital transformation, kind of see our products fitting into. So we have the hybrid cloud infrastructure. Again, as I mentioned, right, that's kind of where Red Hat sits in the IBM space. It's where we sit in most people's kind of data center view of us. Ingram Micro, as an example, puts us in the hybrid cloud data center space. We have cloud native development that is going to fit with most of our middleware, some of our underlying infrastructure technology, and then we have IT automation and management. So really, after that day one, day zero operation where you're deploying, who is helping you guys manage and automate that IT infrastructure? Now we have a really pretty slide where we basically break all of our portfolio into those different pillars. So you can kind of see, right, we had the blue, which was the IT automation and management. And then I guess I can use my pointer. That's going to be things like your Ansible automation platform, your Red Hat Insights to provide analytics to what you guys are doing with Red Hat technology. We have kind of this overlapping here of red, which is going to be that hybrid cloud infrastructure. And so that's where you can see Red Hat Enterprise Linux, you can see OpenShift, you can see OpenStack, as well as some of our other supporting technologies. And then this cloud native development, which is going to include all of the developer tools that we provide. So as I mentioned, middleware, Red Hat runtimes, and then all of our developer tools like code-ready workspaces. We're going to talk a little bit about some of our customers. I'm going to throw a bunch of logos up there. Everyone has those logos that they really like to brag about. I'm going to talk very high level about some of these customers, and then we're going to get into the weeds on two specific use cases that Red Hat is really proud about. As I mentioned, right, industry leading across all of these different industry types within the global Fortune 500, 90% of those run Red Hat at some point. We have the retail companies, the telco, as well as media and entertainment, and then financial service companies. We break those out across our different what we call geos, right? As UPS, Delta in North America, as well as Deutsche Bank, BP in the Middle East and Europe, Indigo, Alliance Bank, and Vivago, I believe that says Viavaro, excuse me, in Latin America. We also break it out by industry, right? And so notice that there's no similar logos on there. We have, again, as I mentioned, customers spanning all of the different industries and all of the different major geos that Red Hat plays in, government, healthcare, transportation as well. But we're nothing without our strategic partners. As I mentioned, I'm an ecosystem SA. I work with partners on a daily basis. I don't touch customer engagements. So our strategic alliances are really what makes Red Hat unique. Saw a couple hands that we have some Red Hat partners in the room. These strategic alliance partners, I'm sure you'll notice at least one or two of the logos up here, really help to make Red Hat the industry leader in IT technology that it is today. And as we're talking about F5, we have our global ISVs as well, so independent software vendors that help run their technology on Red Hat's infrastructure. F5's obviously on there. We have partners running analytics. We have partners doing database and networking, as well as cybersecurity. Then we'll talk about Red Hat and our partners in the field. And so this is where I'm going to dive a little bit more into some actual use cases. And I know there's a lot on this slide. It seems like it may have cut off a little bit, but we're going to talk a little bit about UPS and what we specifically did with UPS. So for those of you that aren't aware, right, UPS is this global logistics company leading the world in shipping, tracking, as well as some of the other office supplies, management, and overall logistics. They came to us about 10 years ago to look at running their technology on open source, and that partnership has really grown into what it is today and has helped make UPS kind of the global leader that it is today. Things like UPS.com run on Red Hat Enterprise Linux at that level. In 2021, they came to us and they wanted to look at how they could become more future-proof, cloud native, and focus more on OpenShift and Kubernetes. And so we worked with them to develop this enterprise-ready developer network called SIP, which stands for infrastructure leading and I believe planning. Basically what it is it allows them to manage the tracking that we all see today on ups.com and the logistics for their actual site managers. All of that is running on Red Hat. As you can see here, right, we have a plethora of services and products that were included: Red Hat OpenShift Container Platform, Red Hat Linux consulting, as well as training and some of our other middleware services. And so UPS came to us. They wanted to do this cloud native development portfolio. And with the success of this SIP program, they have now started to switch all of their internal development to cloud native focused things, so running on Kubernetes. And I want to turn the table a little bit and focus on a partner of ours. About a year ago to the day, I believe, we announced a new partnership with GM. The focus was all of these real-time operating system developments that GM has been investing in with their automotive software. So what we've done, and I'll have a brief video in a second, but what we've done is worked with GM to standardize on open source and standardize on Red Hat in all of their automobiles. And so you'll see coming forward, I believe the first line model will be 2023. So right around this year, that all of the GM automotive vehicles will be running on Red Hat's technology, and it's called ULTIT 5. So I'll get to the video right now. Go ahead and play that.
When people think about cars, they think about some of our iconic designs, like the Chevy Corvette or the Cadillac Escalade. The performance, the styling, the sound.
When you think about how a car operates, what comes to mind is the drivetrain system and the steering wheel. But Red Hat and GM are looking beyond the nuts and bolts of a car down to the operating system. Ultify is an end-to-end software platform that enables frequent and seamless delivery of software-defined features, applications, and services to consumers of GM vehicles.
The importance of integrating the Red Hat in-vehicle operating system with Ultify brings a whole new level of development tools. And what's critical about that is it enables even faster time to market. This continuous integration is the transformation of a vehicle that was software enabled to a vehicle that is now going to be software defined.
Red Hat in-vehicle operating system's mission is to deliver an open, secure, and safe operating system that will serve as the foundation of software-defined vehicles.
If we're going to put an operating system in a vehicle, we have a commitment to our customers to ensure robustness and safety, and for us, Red Hat was a key collaborator to achieving it.
We are reimagining how vehicle platforms can be designed with open source. We really believe this announcement opens up the opportunity to generate excitement and involvement to co-create an automotive community to drive innovation with open source.
It's just an exciting time to be in the automotive industry.
And so I want to stress, right, this is running in an industry where even a second of downtime can really be a matter of life and death. Go back to full screen on this. And so, the fact that GM decided to standardize on Red Hat and Red Hat Enterprise Linux specifically really shows how far the open source community have come. Say, even something as early as 30 years ago, we would never have thought that community-driven development technology would be running in something like a vehicle operating system or a plane operating system, right? And so seeing how open source and how Red Hat has really come so far has been, I think, just kind of groundbreaking. Oops. So I'm going to switch it over to Rodney. So you guys don't have to hear me talk for another 20 minutes. I'll let him kind of talk about who F5 is.
All right. Given the venue, maybe I should go. I got to move. So should I go Vegas lounge act type thing, right? No, just kidding. So as I said before, I didn't see a lot of hands with regards to who's an F5 customer or who's used F5 technology. So it probably, maybe I should take the clicker with me. Thanks. So I want to talk a little bit about, I'll spend a little bit more time on the origins of F5. So F5 was founded back in 1996. So if you think of the late 90s, that time frame, that was when the big web properties were spinning up, right? This is the eBays of the world. This is the Amazons of the world. We have these big web properties with these large server farms. And what they needed out front was something to be able to distribute load intelligently across this back end, right? So this is the load balancing market. What F5 did is they made a name for themselves in the load balancing space. So they founded in 96, they went public in 99, and they did a lot of very, very unique things for the time, right? So they became the 800-pound gorilla in the room. So when you think about what they did in terms of features like advanced load balancing algorithms, having a good understanding of which backend server computationally had the best capacity to serve a request, intelligent traffic management, being able to steer a request based on what that client was actually trying to get to. They have patents around things like cookie persistence. So in the load balancing world, back in the day, when a client came in and let's say they were filling up a shopping cart, well, if that connection got severed or somehow that session went away, when that client reconnects, F5 invented a technology to be able to read a cookie and send that user back to that stateful information so they can wind up in the same shopping cart that got broken when the connection went away. So they did a lot of interesting things, including what you might expect around SSL termination and offload inside of purpose-built SSL accelerator hardware so that they could move those computationally expensive transactions and bulk crypto from CPU into hardware, right? So there's a lot of things that they did. But what F5 saw early on, if you think about that time frame and around the turn of the century when the dot-com bubble burst, they knew as a company that in order for them to be relevant in the industry, they were going to have to find a way to get sticky and important for mission critical applications inside of enterprise customers, not just these large web properties. So in 2004, they developed a brand new operating system. So the stuff I talked about initially, the load balancing, was really just software that was written in FreeBSD running on top of PC commodity hardware. They released a whole new line of appliances that had FPGAs and specialized ASICs for layer 4 processing and all this really technical stuff to improve the speed and performance of the hardware. But most importantly, they developed their product called TMOS. And TMOS stands for Traffic Management Operating System. What TMOS does, it's a real-time OS. And F5 became, at that moment in 2004, a full real-time operating system proxy, right? So they completely decoupled the client side and the server side of the connection. So anything that happens on the client side, they're the server to the client, and on the server side, they're the server to the client and they're the client to the server. So if there's a request from the client or they see something in a header or if they see something in the request that they want to react to, or if they want to do content manipulation or they want to modify the request, they can do that at that layer before it makes it to the backend server. On the server side, if the server is spitting up 500 server errors or 400 errors, or there's something in a header that they want to sanitize, or if it's spitting out credit card information and they want to obfuscate that or they want to send that off to a different server for inspection, they can do all that because, again, they're doing deep packet inspection and they own the session for the life of the session. Now, all that to say is that F5 sits in this very strategic point of control in the data center, and they single-handedly created what Gartner referred to as this application delivery controller space. And the F5 mantra has always been, and is to this day, we need to make sure that applications are fast, we need to make sure they're available, and we need to make sure they're secure. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about all of the other directions and avenues that F5 is going down. I want to keep the conversation more specific to the Red Hat integration. But I do want to give you somewhat of a little bit of a history lesson. And I'm not going to touch on all of these different milestones, but there's a couple I want to point out. So I talked a little bit about the TMOS in 2004 when they wrote that full proxy. That's a very important part of the conversation. In 2003, 2004 timeframe, if you can think back then, that's when we started to understand the way attackers were going after applications. Network security, firewalls were no longer enough. They were, okay, fine, I'll come in on 80, I'll come in on 443. I just need to be at the application. OWASP was telling us things like they're going after vulnerabilities now, right? So we have our OWASP top 10. We have things like mod security in the industry where we're making web application firewalls available to the masses. So F5, through acquisition, went out and purchased a company called Magnifier. That became their web application firewall engine that they have ported into their TMOS platform. And that's, I point that out because it's going to be part of the conversation when we start talking about what we're doing inside of these OpenShift and Kubernetes environments, these containerized and microservices environments. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit, and we can go to 2014 here. In 2014, F5 purchased a company called Defense.net. If you're familiar with a gentleman named Barrett Lyons, he started a company called Prolexic back in the late 90s. This is when we had those offshore gambling sites that were getting attacked and held hostage for ransom. He developed DDoS protection. He's one of the pioneers of DDoS protection. So he started Prolexic. He protected those sites. He sold that company off. He started a new company called Defense.net. And in 2014, F5 bought that. So in steps, F5's managed firewall services and scrubbing centers, right? So that's part of the development of the F5 strategy. But again, fast, available, secure is what we're looking for from a mantra standpoint. So fast forwarding all the way to probably what's most relevant for our conversation today. The approach that F5 takes in terms of securing applications and being relevant at that strategic point of control, the only thing that really changes is the consumption models and where our customers are going with modern applications. If you think on that previous slide we were showing what an application looked like. It had this monolithic 3-tiered web application that had these discrete ingress points, and they were easy to protect, at least from an architecture standpoint. To where we are today with these widely distributed public and private clouds, APIs everywhere, microservices everywhere, the look of an application architecturally is completely different. And so is the way that we serve and protect those applications. So not having a way to address these containerized environments, F5 went out and purchased a company called NGINX. NGINX at the time, or still, 75% of all web servers on the planet are powered by NGINX. So it's the most popular web server container on the planet. So they purchased that to be able to take their WAF engine and do other things inside of these containerized microservices environments. And then there's some other key things that have happened. They're not really part of the conversation today. Most recently, in 2021, they purchased Volterra, which is now their F5 distributed cloud platform, which is an amazing conversation, but it doesn't really fit into our discussion today. But that's just a little bit of a history lesson on what F5's been doing, say, over the last 2 decades with regards to product development and purposeful acquisition strategy. So where does all this tie in, right? So when you're standing up Kubernetes cluster, if you're doing Red Hat OpenShift, there's still a point where we have to expose these applications, these microservices, externally to our end users. And to do that, we have to call what in the Kubernetes world we call container ingress services. And I've got a slide at the end of this where I'm gonna show you what that ecosystem looks like when you're making decisions and why Red Hat is so important as far as an opinionated version of a Kubernetes cluster goes. But we have to have a way to get that traffic into these node IPs and cluster IPs, and that's where container ingress services with big IP stands for. So when you see we integrate with Red Hat, it's important to understand what we're talking about in terms of layer 4 through 7 services. So that little 10-minute education I gave you on what F5 does, now it's applied to these environments. And with NGINX Controller, now as all the things that I talked about, protecting applications, web application firewall features, there's identity awareness to the F5 proxy as well. Taking all of that and treating that ingress traffic at that level before it comes into the cluster is a big part of where the integration sits. Then once we're inside that cluster and we're looking at pod to pod communications and containers speaking to each other within the cluster, we're able to take those same layer 4 through services and apply them in the same way within the cluster with NGINX. So there's a lot to talk about with regards to specifically what F5 does, but from an integration standpoint, that's where it plugs into the Red Hat environment. Do you want to add anything on this slide, Cody? Or
I mean, no, I see a lot of people taking pictures. This is one of the best slides. It's always helpful to have kind of an overarching portfolio slide with our partners. And F5 is our largest ISV. They're one of our oldest ISVs as well. And just the integration between F5 and Red Hat is really helpful, I think, to a lot of our customers. I'll get into it in a few minutes, but I think you covered everything better than I could have covered it.
well, so, and to that point too, I've seen a lot of so-called integrations between different manufacturers, and for the most part, and it's not to be dismissive. There's a lot of good technologies out there, but a lot of times these are executive level relationships and manufacturers sharing each other's logos on their websites and agreeing to play nicely from a support perspective. These integrations with Red Hat are real integrations, right? There's real technology wrapped behind this, and one of those is automation and orchestration models. So there's a long conversation we can get into about automation, but to simplify it for this discussion, there's two real approaches. Everything has an API in this day and age. There is imperative models where I'm telling something how I want it to build it. Right? So if you think of the API on an F5, for instance, anything that you can do from the configuration command line or the UI, you can do with an API, but you have to know the product really, really well. In other words, you have to account for dependencies. Let's say I was building out a virtual server. Well, before I can build this virtual server, I need to build a pool. Before I build a pool, I have to have these pool members. And before I build these pool members, I have to build these health checks so that I know the pool members are up. So build the health check, build the pool member, put the pool members in a pool, put the pool and attach it to an F5 VIP. And there's all sorts of other profiles that get attached to this stuff as well. If you don't know those dependencies, when you're making API calls, there's a lot of things that can break. So with Red Hat Ansible, what we're able to do with them is do this in a more declarative model, which is where the industry is today with DevOps. So we don't say, here's how I want you to build this application, or here's how I want you to build these components. What we're saying is, this is what I want the application to look like. And that could just be a declaration, that just a JSON blob in this case. But what we've done with Red Hat is we have these Ansible playbooks, and we have hundreds of them, where they take all of these dependencies and they work them out in these playbooks, and now we're just applying these playbooks and running them against the config of an F5 device, right? So automation, orchestration, and where we plug in with Red Hat OpenShift are two of the main integration points that we're talking about today. Any questions at all? Okay. All right, so this is a slide that I was referring to. I look at this slide, and I think this is, now this is a very simplified version of what's going on, Cody, right? There's a lot going on if you were going to go out and say, I'm going to stand up my own Kubernetes cluster, and you have to account for dependencies, and you have to account for all these different components within a Kubernetes environment. What Red Hat OpenShift has done is they've taken the best of breed in these, and they've packaged them together in OpenShift so that when you upgrade, it upgrades all the components, and you're not breaking things when you're making changes to a Kubernetes OpenShift cluster. Right?
Yeah, this slide actually is an older version. If you go to the link down below, you can't fit it onto a single slide anymore. And it's to the point where you can't actually read any of the projects. You have to zoom in on the specific subject that you're interested in.
Sure.
It's gotten crazy.
Yeah. And container ingress services is a part of that. So as I said, if you're building resources and applications inside of a Kubernetes cluster, you're going to have to expose it. So you have to create this ingress configuration. And if you look at ingress options, third-party ingress options, there's dozens of them. But Red Hat, with their opinionated version of all this, has chosen to work and partner with F5 to do that. And I think that speaks volumes.
Yeah, and the nice thing about Red Hat is, again, it's all open source. You can swap any of these pieces out for something that you want to manage on your own. And so that's the great thing about the opinionated design, but also allowing customers to make those decisions. Um, so I'm going to talk from my standpoint, right? Rodney kind of gave this really great overview of the technology and how Ingram and F5 see Red Hat. I'm going to talk from the vice versa side and see how Red Hat sees F5 and Ingram. Very, very high level partnership highlights. Rodney's the F5 tech guy. I'm not going to even try to follow his act. But as I mentioned, F5 is one of our largest ISV partners. They are really one of our most active, most mature, all the way from the CEO level down to the solution architects and the in-field people that work together. We are very tightly aligned. We focus on OpenShift Container Platform and Ansible from our end, as well as all of the technology that Rodney mentioned. And these are just two of the high-level views for the highlights. I do want to take a sec and talk about another customer use case. You guys should be familiar with the slide layout at this point. Again, I'm not going to read through everything, but you'll have access to the slides at the end of the presentation. You'll be able to kind of go and view all of our case studies. You'll view all of our source links and everything. So Audi came to Red Hat in 2021 with a requirement of cloud native development platform. So obviously OpenShift fits very well into that, but they also wanted to adhere to their very strict DevSecOps protocols. One of those being Web Application Firewall, WAF, as Rodney kind of touched on. So Red Hat can do that. We don't do it super well. We let our partners do the things that they're really good at. So we reached out to the F5 NGINX team and worked together to help secure this customer opportunity. And so this internal development platform is what is now being used by Audi for all of their development, manufacturing sites, as well as some of their real-time operating system pieces, like I mentioned with GM. So another really great piece of the partnership is our ability to work together on these joint offerings. These ones are obviously very large with recognizable logos. We scan all the way down to the small, medium business, the commercial business side, where our partnership really helps to kind of drive customer adoption. You can see through the results here, right? We reduced that time to market by 6 months, we reduced it up to 6 months. And then we also create that consistency. One of the great things about Red Hat and F5 together is they work very well in public cloud, private cloud, on-prem, edge deployments. It's all pretty much the exact same. What you see is what you get. So another great example of working together with our partners. And that is it. We're going to turn it over to you guys for some Q&A. Please scan the QR code. I'm very excited that I was able to put this together and think of putting a QR code on there. It takes you to a link with all of our slides, our business cards, as well as a bunch of continuing education pieces where you guys can go to get partner training, sign up for a partnership, and any important links that you'll see from the IBM Red Hat side to this show. So, yeah. So Red Hat Enterprise Linux comes out of the box with, I believe, GNOME, which is the user interface, the GUI. However, depending on who you talk to at Red Hat, right, the command line is always going to be king. I am a user interface person myself. I'll be the first to say it, despite this being recorded. But yeah, so we do command line and we do GUI as well. Any other questions?
And I've changed that UI out on. I mean, you can do KDE.
Yeah, you can
doesn't
swap
matter.
everything out. Yeah.
Connectivity and security, right? So that proxy, it's the entry point, right? If you think about the private networking that's happening within a cluster, right? There could be hundreds, thousands of containers that are all privately IP'd in these overlay networks. The job of an F5 is to sit out front and have one IP, one DNS record that points to the entry point to this application. At that point, we're getting the client traffic into the cluster. And inside of the cluster, we're using NGINX to do web application firewall policies and handle routing of east-west traffic inside of the cluster, right? So it's the, yes, security, but also network connectivity to be able to reach these services.
And we have other partnerships that cover other spans of security. Cybersecurity is obviously very in the news right now. We just launched a partnership with a company called QSecure. They do post-quantum security, cybersecurity on RHEL. There are other partners that I mentioned that are on the ISV page, like Synopsys, Sysdig, and any partner, take your pick. Everyone kind of does security at some level now, but obviously F5 is really helping us with that that initial ingress point, and then some of the internal container security pieces as well.
I'm sorry? Oh, yes. Yeah, Microsoft is a huge partner of F5, 100%.
I would say if you take like a landscape of any major tech company out there today and throw a dart at it, F5 and Red Hat work with those partners at some level, right? AWS, Microsoft, Google, Alibaba, obviously IBM, but any of those partners, right? We have joint partnerships with.
Up and down the stack too, not just
Yes.
for one single thing, but for every layer of the stack. There's integrations through identity. There's integrations through sending, credit card information to a DLP product. If you look at our SSL orchestrator product, because we're the de facto termination point for SSL traffic, it's a great place to service chain all of that stuff through maybe a Palo Alto device and an IPS device, and through other DLP products or CDR products like Trellix or something, and then re-encrypt and send on to the application. So there's a lot of different integrations with F5 and other technologies as well as Red Hat. That's a great question, right? So there was one piece of that slide on the integration point where it talked about DNS. So one of the things that F5 can do is make a decision on where to send client traffic based on geo-IP location, based on available resources or capacities at a data center that might exist all around the world, right? So it's a global load balancing product as well.
In the back. Yeah. From my end, and I'll let Rodney talk as well, right? Anytime a customer brings up cloud native, we're moving to the cloud, we're re-looking at our cloud strategy. That to me is going to speak to a Kubernetes or honestly a hybrid cloud strategy at some point. Digital transformation, as I mentioned right in the beginning, those transitions from cultures, those transitions from technology. That's going to be a conversation for either a Red Hat or F5 piece. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, that's a really big part of it is the customers that are in the cloud. They really need to understand, especially multi-cloud or hybrid cloud, they really need to understand the impact that cloud native solutions have on the long-term portability of their application. You can go all in on cloud native services inside of Amazon, and you can use all of their great services. There's a lot of value in that, cost and technology equally. But when it comes time to move some of those workloads into Azure, cloud native becomes a problem, right? So cloud agnostic solutions like F5 as your security device gives not only you the ability to move those applications more freely in the public cloud, but it also gives you the ability to focus on your IT staff and only having to learn one security device as opposed to learning how things work in these other different providers.
And I would also recommend reach out to your Ingram Micro contacts. The Ingram Micro F5 and Red Hat teams are really capable in helping you guys kind of answer those initial questions and figuring out what questions to ask. We're actually putting on an F5 Red Hat program going forward that's going to focus on OpenShift, going to focus on what we talked about today, web application firewall. So the teams at Ingram Micro are more than capable to help with that, right? Yeah, they still do. Absolutely. And that's something that from the Red Hat side, we have really taken a huge focus on. We want to make sure that our main distributors like Ingram Micro are able to deliver technology like that. So they have access to our demo centers. They have access to their own demo centers as well. I think they're called BSCs, right? Oh, COEs. Okay. Everyone's got a different acronym. But yeah, so the COE team, we work really closely with them on both the F5, the Red Hat side. They're great highly recommend reaching out to them. They're very knowledgeable. They know more about Red Hat than I do. So,
And
you
on the
can't go wrong.
F5 side, we have F5 gear in our technology centers inside of Ingram. So we can always show these sorts of integrations, one-offs. Well, we have them in Buffalo and we have them in Austin, Texas. So Buffalo, New York, and Austin, Texas.
See, I forgot you worked for Ingram. You were just doing the whole F5 thing. Should have let you answer that.
I latch
Yeah.
on. I always go for best of breed, so
Yeah,
it's easy
it
for me
makes
to.
sense. It's very easy. Yeah.
F5's better. That's all you need to know, right?
Awesome. If there are no other questions, I think we're all set.
I'll do one quick
yeah.
plug commercial. We're having we'll make it available. I can add to what's
Yeah,
in there, right? So
absolutely.
I'll make it available. I'm having a workshop on June 14th where I'm actually going to show these Ansible playbooks, making configuration changes in a declarative fashion to an F5 device. So if you want to see the playbooks in action, I'll be able to show that to you on June 14th. So we'll make sure that information's inside of those resources.
Yeah, and I see some people have already requested access. I apologize. That's a Red Hat thing that they lock it down, but we'll constantly update with new content and everything in this Google Drive. And it links to what the great IBM team did with their Box drive as well. So you'll get all of the content that you need. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.